I need to pay for the pastor's gift when I can barely afford rent. Fine, then get your own computer. This happened several years ago back when I was part of a Christian cult church and in leadership. Also, I'm writing this on mobile, so sorry if it looks funky. Anyways, on to the story. Back when I was 22 and a young, impressionable, young adult, I was part of the media team for this church. We were responsible for creating videos and flyers as well as posting on social media and taking pictures, etc. This was volunteer work, but the pastor, we'll call him Pastor Corruption, was an anal, cold-hearted dictator of the religious institution who would often give us last-minute projects that would keep us up all night in order to make a video to play during service the next day. We averaged 3 to 5 hours of sleep per night, but this was while I was in school, so during this time, in order to stay on top of my homework and other projects, I would average closer to 2 to 3 hours per night, and TBH, I'm not sure how I survived with only having occasional bouts of suicidal ideation and paranoia or delusions. Pastor Corruption loved money. He had a giant, 6-bedroom house for himself and his wife, only complete with heated driveways and the latest model Cadillac which sat atop of said driveway. The church building itself was overinflated, which sat close to 1,000, but maybe had a congregation of only 400 or so. More than Pastor Corruption loved money, he loved other people's money. 70% of the sermons were regarding how you needed to give the shirt off your back to the church or else you didn't love God and were going to hell, which is ironic considering that their accountant had been caught embezzling funds in the past. This went beyond tithes, which was 10% of what you make, and included pledges, fundraisers, giving for church events, and going to retreats that made a profit from the attendees. Pastor Corruption and his pack of goons, aka associate pastors, who also shamed you for not giving money and being poor, would openly brag about how God blessed them after these rounds of extortion. Well, one day, it is near Pastor Corruption's birthday and his pack of goons decided that the pastor's car from last year's model was too old and he needed a brand new car. They took a pledge from all the ministry departments to pay for said car. The minimum pledge you were allowed to make was $300 and the media team was no exception. Me, being a broke college kid with a minimum wage part-time job, decided that was impossible and I just wasn't going to pledge anything. This led to several hour-long lectures and shaming sessions about how I was seen as a leader. I wasn't seen at all since I was always working behind the scenes, and I needed to set an example. Finally, I got fed up and worn down to the point I confessed that I couldn't pledge because that would be taking all my rent money. I lived with some other leaders from the church at the time and shared a room with another girl. $300 doesn't seem like a lot now, but at the time, for not even having my own space or a place for my bed, this was highway robbery, especially for a broke college kid. A girl who lived with me, who also was lecturing me, told me just pledge the money anyway and I can pay rent later. Welp, I was coerced into giving the $300 for Pastor Corruption's stupid car, and now he had 2 brand new Cadillacs sitting in his heated driveway. 3 days after rent was due, the girl who lectured me about pledging comes up and asks me for the rent money. The conversation basically goes like this: I don't have it yet. What do you mean you don't have it? I gave you 3 extra days to figure out something. What am I supposed to do? Pull it out of thin air? Maybe you should be more responsible with your spending. I have spent $2.16 on myself in the last 3 weeks, and it was to get a coffee so I don't crash my car while driving because of a lack of sleep. I'll give you until the end of this week, but you can't expect us to cover you any longer than that. You are being extremely selfish. Now, on top of worrying about juggling projects between school and the church, I need to worry about not getting evicted. Then I come up with a plan: I'll just pawn my laptop. My laptop was brand new, since it had just come out recently, and I decided to splurge and buy the latest model when my last 6-year-old laptop took a dump on me a few months before. I used it for schoolwork, but they had labs I could use on campus that would help me get by. However, the other thing I used it for was media projects for the church. You know how Pastor Corruption likes money. Well, he didn't like spending money, so the media team had a 13-year-old desktop that was overloaded with files, which severely slowed down its already laggy performance and caused it to take several hours to render videos if they didn't fail or corrupt. When I had gotten my laptop, it was fairly decent at rendering large video files in under 10 minutes and had amazing clarity and graphics, so they had convinced me to switch to using my laptop for all things media related rather than using the decade-old desktop. I didn't mind because it didn't interfere with my schoolwork that much, but all the templates for social media and other video and files were on my laptop now, meaning every week I was responsible for getting everything updated and handing off the final version of the file to the head of the media team. The girls I lived with would help me edit these files when we were home and were the leaders of the media team. This means that all the recent files of projects they needed were on my laptop and no backups were made on the church-owned desktop. I pawned my laptop, got the rent money, and paid the leader without saying anything about how I managed to get the money in a single day. Saturday night rolls around, which is usually when we work on the video files we need for the next day, and they ask me where my laptop is so we can get started. I don't have it. Where is it? I pawned it. What? I pawned it. Why? I needed to pay you rent, I had no other way to get you the money. I couldn't afford the pledge, but you graciously gave me an extra 3 days to pay it and make up for my rent I used to pay for the pledge. This is one of the most valuable items I own, so I figured it was the quickest way to repay you. At this point they start freaking out, they want to go get the laptop out right then, but the pawn shop was closed. So they rush to the church and fire up the Dino desktop and desperately try to recreate the videos we needed from scratch. However, they have no backups since mine was being exclusively used, and the programs and versions that I was using versus what the Dino had was completely different. Think Adobe CC versus Final Cut Pro. In the end, we didn't have anything ready in time for service that Sunday morning and the entire media team got yelled at by pastor corruption. I got double yelled at by the leaders on the media team, but it was worth it to see them panic. Several months later I ended up leaving the church altogether and was nice enough to give them all the files of stuff I had on my laptop. My only regret is being so amicable when I left, because fuck that place and fuck pastor corruption. However, last I heard most of the people I knew there have left and the church has downsized considerably and moved buildings. I assume they never got a new desktop for the media team after I left. This is one of the many outrageous aspects of this church, but it made me never want to deal with organized religion again, and now I'm mostly agnostic. Edit. Wow, did not expect so many people to see this post. I hope y'all enjoyed this story from my early 20s. It's amazing, but not surprising, how many other religious organizations are like this. BTW, someone already guessed the organization in the comments, but it doesn't have many upvotes as of now. For all those telling me in increasingly creative ways that I was spineless, thanks for the good laughs. Legitimately, I hope y'all don't spend your entire day online making judgments about someone based on a random story, lol. But just to clear things up, unless you've been through a traumatic event, abusive situation around narcissistic people, you really can't understand. I probably could have done more malicious things like exposing them or destroying things, but to someone who felt like they had no power at the time, this was a perfect way to get a little revenge. Yes, it was only a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things, but in front of 400 people and leadership who expected the service to run a specific way, they could barely save face. It was malicious in the sense that the narcissistic pastor took it personally that it reflected poorly on them. But anyways, I digress. To everyone else who could relate or voiced your sympathy, thank you all for the kind words or funny stories of your own. I enjoyed reading through all of them. I hope all you ex-church people are in a better place in life. I certainly am. Here's to staying far away from a group of miserable people. So please do not ask for more details. As far as the grammar goes, I apologize for my bad grammar. However, I am not perfect and do not intend to go back through and edit my entire post. Relevant comments. Many years ago I worked for a financial software company. All our contracts were with investment banks. I was an account manager and the only one in the company with foreign exchange experience. I handled about a third of the customer base and was very involved with FX software management. The other 2/3 of the accounts were managed by my 4 coworkers. The owner CEO was a crook and a playboy. We were not well managed and were somewhat dependent on venture capital. Our CFO was chatty and bitter, the company pimp, CEO's whoring buddy, transferred to our New York office from the one in Japan. Total completely incompetent. Well, other than throwing parties that brought in money from horny rich guys. They made him my supervisor because I didn't need one and it gave him something legitimate to do. He wandered in just before lunch every day and did no work. But, he insisted I show him everything I did to make sure it was up to his standards and reputation. All he did was take my name off the documents I gave him, put his name on them and present them in executive meetings as his work. He never even bothered to read the documents and couldn't answer any questions. Nobody was fooled except the CEO, and everyone hated both of them. When there were layoffs, I thought my job was pretty safe and was very surprised to be let go because I was, to quote the CEO, too expensive and my supervisor could do my work. Our group's VP, who told me this, was very unhappy, said he insisted he be the one to tell me and made it clear he thought the CEO was making a mistake. A couple of months later, one of my buddies who still worked there called and tested the waters about me coming back, but I already had another job and said no. By the end of the year, I heard they'd lost nearly all their foreign exchange contracts at the cost of tens of millions of dollars. A few years later the company went under. Not malicious compliance, but a very satisfying karma.